The genuine victims of human rights violations are the people of Zimbabwe who have endured the gross dehumanizing effects of illegal sanctions and therefore deserved spotlight should be beamed on the millions of Zimbabweans who have borne the brunt of the illegal Western imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe.
Vungai vanhu vekuchipinge kana kuplum 3 kana kuBible Beach kana kuKaribia vari kutaura nenyaya yevhu ravo kuti iwe rima nepapa iwe rima nepapa. Vanhu vokuEngland votsamwa kuti muri kutaura nevhu renyu sei. Soro yavo.
Welcome to this, the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. Here we talk people, power, and politics. We answer the questions that all of you want answered. This is the platform where we allow all ideas to be heard, people to talk to each other and never through each other. And I, your host as usual, Dhara B, will be talking to you about Zimbabwe's foreign relations and how this is benefiting or affecting you at home. Now join me after this break on this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation. Now, welcome back to this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation. Now, over the past few years, we've been having amazing things happening on the diplomatic front. Zimbabwe has its policy in terms of foreign relations, an enemy to none and a friend to all. They are talking about engagement and re-engagement. And one of those blocks or partners that Zimbabwe has been re-engaging with is the European Union. Now, on this part of this episode, I'm joined by the EU delegation ambassador to Zimbabwe, Jobst, and we are going to be talking about Zimbabwean relations with the EU. Now, thank you very much, Ambassador. And
it's a pleasure for me.
It's nice to step in Europe for a moment. Now, Ambassador, let's talk about your time in Zimbabwe so far. You've been here for 1.5 years. How have you found Zimbabwe in your mission?
But let's say before coming here, you read about a country and you do not know what to expect. And I must say, I'm extremely positively surprised. I see a fantastic country, a fantastic nature, beautiful climate, amazing people. I mean, the warmth of the people, the education of the people. For me, it's stunning, and for my entire family. So we really love Zimbabwe, and we are very happy to be here.
Amazing. What places have you been to?
I have been, I would say, a bit everywhere in the country. Obviously, the first missions were like to Bulawayo and to Mutare and to Wick Falls. But then I went to Binga, and I went in more remote areas, Gonarasu, and I went to Nyanga, and I went to Matopo Hills, obviously, Great Zimbabwe. I went to project openings in small villages. And I have seen, I think, quite a lot already of Zimbabwe after 1.5 years. Obviously not enough, it's a big country. But also what is amazing is how different the climate then is, yeah, and how you meet different people. You have obviously Shona, Ndebele, you have Tonga, you have different languages, but also the people are a bit different. The issues, positive or negative, are different per region. So for me, it is very enlightening to go around in the country. country.
Amazing. But you went to Binga. Did you enjoy the beach there?
I stayed on a night on the Zambezi River, and I found it very peaceful. It's very nice to be just at the river.
If I give you a piece of land, you stay?
You know, in my job, we're always moving on. After every 3 or 4 years, we are moving from one country in another. So before I've been in Ivory Coast, now I'm here, and I don't know where I will go next.
So you said you read about Zimbabwe before you came. What are the major differences from what you read and what you've encountered so far?
I think when you read about a country, you are more into data and let's say, whatever. You read, for example, inflation. At the time, I think it was 300 or 400% inflation. Now it's the SIG, but it was the RGTS. And when you come, you reckon that most of the business is done in US dollar, for example. So in reality, the inflation has a limited impact. And you read about, let's say, electricity shortages, water shortages, etc. Then you reckon that many people have boreholes, they have solar. Solar obviously resonates with the EU as a renewable energy. So in reality, it looks then different from perhaps what the data gives. Mm-hmm. And again, I say what probably initial briefings do not reflect is the people, how the people are. And I was saying at the beginning, the warmth of the people and the high education level of people is something very, very nice as well.
Amazing. Unfortunately, this interview won't be that warm, but Ambassador, let us talk about the EU-Zimbabwe relations. Has there been any shift in the policy of the EU towards Zimbabwe over the past 2-3 years?
I think I came here with a mandate of constructive engagement. That obviously you were saying at the beginning, the Zimbabwean policy of engaging and re-engaging. So that goes quite well together. It doesn't necessarily mean we can engage in all areas, but I think we are looking in particular in areas where we have shared values, shared interests, where we can work together. And I think since my arrival, we are really trying to do that, to build bridges, to see where we can work together and where can we have a very positive, engaging relationship.
What are the areas, Ambassador, that you have had, the EU has had, positive or common interests where you are actually working together with Zimbabwe?
I give you an example. For example, gender. It's a good example because we have a Team Europe initiative with over 250 million euros together with the EU member states on gender equality and women empowerment. Why gender equality and women empowerment? Because it's a core value for the EU, but it's also in Zimbabwe a topic which is high up on the political agenda. And if you see, Zimbabwe worldwide is the only country where the president himself endorsed a compact against gender-based violence, for example. There are a lot of initiatives on gender. So it's easy because we have a shared value. We have a shared interest. We believe in a gender equality society. So it makes it easy for us to invest. And I give you another example, which is greener and climate smart agriculture. Another Team Europe initiative together with our member states, also over 250 million euros. Why? Because sustainable agriculture, climate change are topics which anyway no country in the world can do alone. We can only do it together. And if you look at the current drought, I think it's a topic which is highly relevant right now. How can you make agriculture sustainable in times of El Nino? What can you do? I think it's a fantastic area as well where we can work together.
You talk about green jobs, and I think Team EU also talks about organic farming, and you have some reach in Manicaland. Let's talk about that, His Excellency.
About reach in?
I think you've been supporting some farmers in terms of blueberries in Chipinge, in Manicaland area.
I mean, generally we support all the value chain of horticulture. You perhaps know that the EU and Zimbabwe have a free trade agreement. And basically any company in Zimbabwe can export to the EU, tariff and duty free. We are the biggest buyer of horticulture products. So of course we are supporting also the value chains. You mentioned blueberries, but it could be nuts, it could be citrus, it could be a lot of other things. And here I think we see a lot of possibilities for farmers to increase their productivity. And it could be through financing. Sometimes companies or farmers would like to expand. It's not easy to get access to finance. So our bank has set up a financing program with over 40 million euros. We are currently looking into a new version of it because it went very fast. But we are also looking into farming methods which allow you, for example, to farm during drought or simply to meet requirements of the EU market. Because the EU market is open, but obviously you must also hit the right spot in the market and have a product which you can sell in the European market.
And how has Zimbabwe been faring in that partnership? How much of trade is happening between EU and Zimbabwe?
Currently, we have an annual volume of 700 million euros. We are the fourth biggest buyer of Zimbabwean products, and we are the biggest buyer by far with over 40% of horticulture products. So I could lean back here and could say that's fantastic. But actually, I believe there could be much more because we have currently around 185 countries registered for export to the EU. That's actually very little if you think about the possibility that any company could export tariff and duty-free to the EU. It's very little. So I have said publicly, and I say it today again, first of all, you have to help us to get across to companies that this possibility exists. Because often when I say we have a free trade agreement, people do not even believe me. But we have it since years and it's working. And secondly, I also believe we could hit the target of 1 billion euros per year relatively easily. If that were to spread out and companies are more proactive in wanting to export to the EU.
So you talk about companies not believing you and not exporting.
I'm saying not believing you, but they often just simply do not know that there is a free trade agreement.
There has been a major part of EU-Zimbabwe relations that has been discussed and hammered on around sanctions. But you tell me about this free duty-free in trade. How long has it been there, and how has sanctions affected this, if any?
The agreement is there since 2012 and has never been affected. You know that the EU does not have sanctions against Zimbabwe. We have advised our companies not to deliver arms to Zimbabwe. And the Zimbabwean defense industry is listed as an entity, but we have nothing since years, neither against the economy, people, whatsoever. There's nothing. And that's exactly the point. Sometimes people have in mind there could be something, and therefore they do not even think about the possibility that there could be a free trade agreement. The free trade agreement we are having has been negotiated back in 2012. And now in the last years, it became more known. But that's what I mean. It is important for companies to understand that this option exists. And not only it exists, the EU locally here supports companies as well to do more export with all kinds of programs, facilitating export. Because obviously export is not only having blueberries or having citrus and then sending it to the EU market. It's a bit more complicated than that because you need to fill in forms. You have to understand how it works on the border. So we were also working with the border services to make them understand what type of product can be duty and tariff-free exported to the EU. So it's a whole process, but there's a lot of money and goodwill going into it in order to increase trade.
Amazing, Ambassador. This, I hope Zimbabweans take advantage of this. And begin to look at the partnership and friendship with the EU. But I also understand that you've been invested as EU in Kariba. And let's talk about that project.
Now we have a big initiative now going well beyond Zimbabwe. That's called Global Gateway. Global Gateway. That is about connectivity between the EU and the world, but also between countries, ultimately also to enhance connectivity with the EU. For that, we have 300 billion euros made available throughout the world, 150 billion for Africa. And these are typically projects where I would say they fit into what we would say is our set of values. I was talking earlier about shared values. I take, for example, renewables. Renewables is a shared value because we believe that not the EU alone with 27 member states, but only all countries in the world have to work together to fight against climate change and therefore have more renewable energies. So when you look at the Kariba Dam was up for rehabilitation. It represents on one hand a huge danger. If this dam collapses, 5 million people would be affected. And secondly, it's a primary source of electricity production for Zambia and for Zimbabwe. So that fits under what we want to do under Global Gateway. So we are the biggest donor with 113 million euros to rehabilitate the dam. And I went there and I don't know whether you had a chance to look at it. It's the biggest dam rehabilitation in the world. And it's a high-tech workspace. You have companies from France. Originally, the dam, I think, was done by Italian companies. So a lot of European involvement. And I hope that later this year, I will see the opening of the gates and the filling of the sponge pool. So that is typically a project we would do. But we also do other things. For example, under Global Gateway, the Natur Africa approach. It's over 70 million euros goes into a new approach for protecting biodiversity, but putting people in the middle. And it's very relevant for Zimbabwe because you have a human-wildlife conflict very often. Yeah, you have elephants, and then there is a village, or there are fields, and then people do not understand, they ruin our fields, etc. So the approach is about putting people in the middle and let them benefit from the biodiversity, not create a conflict. So that when people can protect biodiversity, they also can create livelihoods, they can benefit from it. It's a new approach, and we invest very heavily in Zimbabwe in that, because it's such an amazing wildlife, but obviously people have to appreciate that and not hate it, they have to embrace it. So it's important to put people in the middle.
Ambassador, people would want to know why is the EU taking the large chunk of its budget, of its taxpayers' money, and bringing it to Zimbabwe? What is your interest?
I mean, it depends on what area it is, and I think I was already saying it. If you have shared values, then you have a partner. If everything which is, for example, around, let's say, climate, green, etc., there is no border in the world. You cannot say one country is having an approach where they try to reduce pollution, and obviously most of the pollution today and in the past also has been created by the industrialized countries, not necessarily by Africa, but Africa, in Zimbabwe, countries in development, they can avoid mistakes perhaps we did in the past. And so working together on these topics, I think, is something very natural, because there are no borders. Yeah, so mobilizing taxpayers' money for that is something very natural, in particular if you have shared values, as I say, because you work as a partner together to achieve a goal. Then you have other processes where I think they are mutual beneficial, like the arrears clearance process. You might have heard about that. So Zimbabwe has arrears of around $20 billion. They affect many European countries because the arrears are with European countries, but also with others, with China, with Brazil, with other countries. And we commend very much the undertaking to say we would like to get rid of these arrears. And of course, we would like to work together with you, because we also feel it's a story which dates back years, and it's good to get rid of it because the country would have access to sovereign lending at some point. So there's always a good reason why we should work together.
You talk about the arrears clearance, His Excellency. There's been a lot of information or misinformation, if you want to call it, around these arrears. And Zimbabwe, especially in the political space, they have been saying that they can't borrow because of sanctions and stuff like that. And you talk about the failure to borrow because of these arrears. Let's have what is the correct position there?
The correct position is that Zimbabwe took money from different financial institutions, multilateral institutions like the European Investment Bank, the World Bank, the AFDB, but also from countries, several European countries, Germany, France, etc., but also from Brazil, from China, etc. And today, the national debt plus the arrears together form a package of around 20 billion. Arrears means I took money and I did not pay it back. So obviously then you cannot lend anymore to that entity. That's very clear. So that has nothing to do with sanctions. That has to do with the arrears. So that is the reason why we commend very much the initiative taken by His Excellency to say, I would like to launch a high-level arrears clearance and debt resolution platform. And he has involved the former president of Mozambique, Chissano, and also the president of the AFDB, Adesina, to say, let's all work together with the stakeholders to find a solution for that. And that solution actually entails reforms on the economic side, reforms on the good governance side, and the solving issues on the land side. There are 3 tracks. And these 3 tracks are currently operating, and the objective is that at some point there is a debt restructuring and there's a debt relief, there's partial repayment, etc. And then Zimbabwe would have access to sovereign lending. Why is that so important? You could say we don't need money. But why is it important? Because Zimbabwe has fixed for itself an agenda 2030, which is becoming an upper middle income country and has identified needs in terms of building infrastructure, I think for around probably 40 billion. So this money can come from sovereign lending. But if you cannot have access to sovereign lending, then you can use your own resources. But for that, I would say quantum leap forward to say we would like to become an upper middle income country, any country in the world would probably need access to sovereign lending. And then you can phase it out later. And therefore, this process is highly important. But it's a process which actually goes beyond only getting rid of the arrears. It's also a process where Zimbabwe has engaged with the international community on very not always easy topics, good governance, on all the economic reforms, having an open exchange about it, the land issues. Is a fantastic achievement in itself.
So you talk about just not paying back the debt, but also dealing with governance issues. And I know that you as the EU and Zimbabwe, you have a political dialogue. And how is this governance issue? How have you rated it? And is there an improvement? Are you satisfied?
So first of all, what has been proposed by the government is a sovereign decision by the government. So the government has put forward in the arrears clearance process its own ideas about what they would like to do. That's based on the National Development Strategy 1. So, for example, doing monetary policy reforms or macroeconomic reforms, that's coming from the National Development Strategy. Doing good governance reforms, including increasing civic space, for example, is coming from the National Development Strategy, including the indicators. And the same for the land issues. So what is the very positive thing about this process is that it's government-led and government-driven. We as stakeholders, we can commend it or applaud it, but it remains a Zimbabwean decision to say we want to do that. I think that's very important. Then we as EU, we have now in June what we call a partnership dialogue. Before it was a political dialogue, where the EU and Zimbabwe are sitting together in a room and discussing all pending issues. Arrears clearance is one, but there is also trade, investment, and many other issues.
Most of the time, Ambassador, when you speak about what Zimbabwe has done, and you measure it against what they want, their own constitution, their own development strategy and stuff. In your measurement and in your engagement, do you think that we are moving as a country in line with the issues that we have put ourselves to say, these are the things that we want to do? Are we moving in that direction?
I take the arrears clearance because it's a very holistic process, and it entails so many different reforms that's probably a good point. We are in the process of, or the government is in the process of finalizing the matrices of things they would like to do in the coming years. So I think it's too early to say, did they deliver, did they not? I think we have to wait and to see what happens. But obviously, what we see, what the government has put forward as a sovereign country is very promising. And that's the reason why you have such a big buy-in of all the stakeholders of this process. Because the government autonomously is saying, that's what we want to do. Then I think we should have maybe another interview in a year's time or 2 years' time to say, so what has been delivered? But it is, of course, very important also in terms of trust building that the government delivers on what they say they would deliver.
But you speak like that, but the EU immediately after the elections withdrew money that it had offered and to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Is this a show of lack of trust?
So first of all, after elections, the elections we had hoped would be an element which would contribute to trust building. They didn't contribute. I think we had different opinions on the elections, and you can defend each opinion. But at the end of the day, it was not something where we necessarily agreed and where we were on the same line. So it didn't help for the trust building. But that has nothing to do with the funding for the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission. We stopped the funding with the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission because several of the election observation reports pointed towards a lack of independence and missed opportunities with the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission during the elections. So we didn't feel it's the right moment to put money into an institution which has been heavily criticized during and after elections. But that doesn't mean we are not supporting independent institutions. On the contrary, we will do and we will continue doing it. And a good example is actually our support for the arrears clearance process. Because in the arrears clearance process, in the good governance side, the government proposed electoral reforms, more independence of institutions. Of course, it's something we are supporting. I think it's a good proposal. But directly after elections, we didn't feel it was the right moment to continue working with TEC.
There was a backlash immediately after the EU made this announcement. And those in the ruling ZANU-PF through their spokesperson, Christopher Mchangwa, was saying, you can keep your money, we don't need it. How does it work for partnerships that you're talking about? How is the ordinary Zimbabwean out on the streets affected by such exchanges?
I think you have to reply to that rather than me. I was an ordinary Zimbabwean affected by exchanges like that. I think you have to distinguish between a long-term relationship between two countries or a bloc and a country. We are here since 1981. We have a long-term relationship with Zimbabwe. There might be also moments where it's tense during elections, where things are said which maybe we consider not the right things to be said. But then you have also to see you want to build something and you want to remain constructively engaged. So I think we look at it from that perspective, that we are a long-term partner. In the last 15 years, we have mobilized 2.1 billion euros in support for essentially national strategies. What Zimbabwe wants to do, we have ongoing 900 million euros in projects in Zimbabwe. This is enormous amounts. Yeah? So I think when you say how should an ordinary person look at it, I think the ordinary person should distinguish between a heated debate or a context of election and a long-term partnership, which is in particular also beneficial for the Zimbabwean population.
Amazing. Ambassador, let me take you to the Russia-Ukraine aggression. During the EU Day, which I attended, you spoke passionately about it, and the position of the EU was very, very clear. You're against the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Maybe you can just talk about that message first.
I mean, of Ukraine is a sovereign country. It's a sovereign country. A sovereign country can make choices. They can say, we would like to be in the Russian Federation, we would like to be totally independent, we would like to be closer with the EU, we would like to join another bloc. It's a free decision of a sovereign country. So we believe that this kind of sovereignty is an absolute key principle in the world. Because if sovereignty is not respected anymore, then another country can just take over a neighbor. And so a country wanting to be free and wanting to be master of their own destiny should be supported in all cases. So when we see Russia basically attacking Ukraine and capturing and occupying land, then that is it's the worst a country can do. It's an attack on the sovereignty of a country and taking the land away. And not to talk about the thousands and thousands and thousands of people dying, families, civil people. They have nothing to do with that. So yes, we will always support Ukraine, and we have just mobilized extra money to further support Ukraine, because we believe in that principle, and we believe that at the end of the day, Ukraine should be free in its choices and not be dictated what they have to do.
So Russia has hit back, and it has spoken to African countries, including Zimbabwe, and have said that you are being duplicitous. The European Union and other Western partners are dictating to Africans on how, and they're taking away the sovereignty. How would you push back to that? Because this propaganda or this information is being pushed.
I know it's pushed, but you see, I'm sometimes, I believe deep inside, Zimbabwe was always fighting for its freedom. I mean, you have freedom fighters. So somehow the fight for independence and the fight for sovereignty is something which I believe resonates with Zimbabweans. So I also believe when they look at a war like the war in Ukraine, they see that it's not Ukraine attacking Russia, or it's not Ukraine doing so whatever we would justify an occupation of this country. So yes, there is maybe propaganda saying all kind of things to justify an act of aggression on the sovereignty of a country. But at the end of the day, you cannot justify it. You can do what you want, you cannot justify it.
Do you fear losing other partners that you have in Africa to Russia as this war stretches on, as a bloc?
No, I don't think we fear losing partners because of that war. We obviously also are sometimes looking into narratives which are really worrying. For example, if you look into food insecurity, if Russia blocks the delivery by Ukraine of grains, and then afterwards says, well, Ukraine doesn't want to deliver, that's obviously very worrying. And we live in a time of misinformation, and that is not always easy to set straight. To set it straight here, Ukraine did everything basically to free a channel in the Black Sea to continue delivery of grains, and they do it actually at a level now which is almost the pre-war level. But it's not because Russia wanted that. Russia did everything to stop this. And what we did not like is that food delivery or grain delivery was used as a weapon because it hits third countries. You see what I mean? That if you stop grain delivery, you are maybe hurting a little bit the economy of Ukraine, but in reality, you hurt all the countries depending on delivery of grains. So that we cannot really accept.
Amazing. But I had an opportunity to go on a study tour with the Frederick Newman Foundation around issues related to corruption. And one of the most amazing things that hit me when I went to the IMF was that whilst you, as the European...
To the IMF?
Yes, to the International Monetary Fund, whilst as the Western countries, through the IMF and the World Bank, when they lend, they look at issues around corruption, and they deal with those so that countries can actually get loans that are productive in their countries. But on the other hand, China would just give money and won't really care about the politics, about the corruption and stuff like that. And this has thrown many African countries into crisis because most of the money has been stolen. Now, and there now seems to be a little bit relaxation from the EU, from other Western countries on demand for these political reforms before they give money. Are you afraid of China?
We have a very constructive relationship with China. We have actually a policy with China. We believe we are partners in cooperation. We are competitive somehow economically. We don't have exactly the same value system. So, but we maintain a very constructive relationship with China. And if you look, the EU is probably the biggest market for China. So somehow, I think we believe that the right way of working together as a partner is to do it in a sustainable way. When I talked to you earlier about Global Gateway is what we believe in. We believe if a road is built somewhere and we come as a partner, or if a bridge is built, or if something is built, ideally that should be done in a sustainable way. What does that mean, the word sustainable? It means you're not just building a road and there are communities and you kick them out and the environment gets destroyed and the workers are not local workers but foreign workers. That's not sustainable. Why it's not sustainable? Because the people who have been pushed aside will be unhappy. The environment is destroyed forever. And if you later do a maintenance of your road, you don't have the local knowledge of people to do it. So we have our own offer of infrastructure support, which is Global Gateway. So are we afraid or not? We have just a different model and we promote our model. And we hope that, yes, we sincerely hope that people understand that for themselves is perhaps the better model to go with Global Gateway than with other offers which exist. But sometimes countries decide differently. And then sometimes they also regret having decided differently, because in the long run, sustainability is a key aspect, and that is valid for energy, this is valid for infrastructure, this is actually valid for everything.
Do you think that there's a time where the EU can soften its stance and or its value system because of competition from such difference in value system?
Soften our stance. I mean, we are talking about core values. Yeah? We will not soften or we will not alter our core values. I give you an example. So if today Zimbabwe wants to work together on renewable energies with the EU, we come back to the idea of shared values, we will do it. If today Zimbabwe wants to work together with the EU on coal, we will not go for it. We do not believe that that is the right approach. We understand that a country having, for example, reserves on coal won't maybe go into electricity production, but we do not want to be part of it. So I think we will not alter our values because of that, because we believe in them, and we believe that they help to achieve prosperity, protection of the planet, have equal societies, etc. It's our own model. But obviously, we live in a multipolar world, and you can have other entities or other countries, you were talking about China, having a different system. It might be appealing for some countries.
I mean, Ambassador, you have, as the EU, you have a motto, EU with you. And this speaks to relations. I want us to talk about the future relations between Zimbabwe and EU. How do they look?
I think, and I hope they are bright. I was talking a bit about trade before, that we would like to get the trade up to $1 billion. I think we really believe also in the arrears clearance process. I think that is something, I'm not sure during my time I will see the end of this process, but it's something where we think that is a fantastic process. And we are sitting together in a room and we can discuss, and not only us, the EU, also the other stakeholders, in a very open manner, any topic. I think that is what a relationship is about. It's not only to work together during sunshine, but it's to work together also in difficult times, and also be able to raise difficult topics where perhaps we do not agree. And I think this process has shown that that is possible. And so I believe, and I hope this will continue in the next couple of years, and it will deepen the trust between the EU and Zimbabwe, but also with other partners. And I think that resonates very well with the idea of bringing Zimbabwe back in the international community. I think that's what Zimbabwe wants, but what we want as well. We want Zimbabwe to succeed. We want that Zimbabwe becomes an upper middle income country. But it always needs two to tango, and therefore it's important to work together in the next couple of years.
So you talk about succeeding and talking about the difficult topics. El Nino induced drought, and recently government said over half of its population would need food aid, and the Zimbabwean government or the Zimbabwean president sent out an SOS for about $2 billion United States dollars in food aid. What is the EU going to be doing to assist it?
Yeah, the El Nino, I think, has a severe impact, not only on Zimbabwe, by the way, also on the neighboring countries. It's not only a declared crisis in Zimbabwe, but it's a regional crisis. So I think we as a partner obviously want to be there. The first thing we did, we actually have activities for $62 million, which are directly supporting drought-related issues. And I just give you a couple of examples, so it becomes more tangible. When you don't have water, you have eventually not to continue planting. What you was always planting is not working, but you can go back to drought-resistant crops. So we have big initiatives in helping farmers using drought-resistant crops. We have specific initiatives where specific grains can be planted in arid areas, and they will grow and they will help to feed the livestock. It's also very important. There are several initiatives to say if it's not raining, but now it's getting colder, there is moisture in the morning. How can you keep this humidity on a field? There are techniques. So there's a lot of research and techniques and planting and so on. So we do this very massively in the context of our initiative on greener and climate smart agriculture. And on top of it, we have also alerted our humanitarian service, ECHO, to look at it at a regional level, because it's not only Zimbabwe. So have done several member states. So we will be there. We are already there, because also El Nino, we could see it coming. It's a cyclic issue, and there will be La Nina as well, probably, with more flooding. So it will be then the opposite problem. So I think it's also something where people know that could happen, and therefore preparedness is also a very important issue in that.
Yeah, but you also speak about, you brought the issue around also talking about the difficult issues. And the difficult issue in Zimbabwe, and my interaction with the European Union, is that there has been worry over the private voluntary organization bill, which appears, in your view as the EU, to be closing civic space. Are you talking about that?
Of course, we are also talking about that, in particular in the context of the arrears clearance process. You know that the EU is co-chairing with the Ministry of Justice the track on good governance. And the government has put forward, as I was saying, in a sovereign decision to say, we would like to increase civic space. So then we saw the issuing of the PVO bill. Now, when we talk, and what is very positive in the meetings, civil society takes part in the meetings. And there are also meetings in the next couple of days between civil society and the Ministry of Justice to discuss it. It is not about a PVO bill. It is about what is in the PVO bill and in how far does that rather lead to a shrinking of civic space than an increase of civic space. So that, I think, is currently under discussion. So it's not mutually exclusive. You can have a PVO bill and you can still increase civic space. But when this PVO bill is very restrictive, then as a sovereign country, you can have such a bill, but on the other hand, you will probably not meet the target you have fixed for yourself under the arrears clearance process to increase civic space. See, and that is a discussion we are having very openly in the governance working group. But I also say the Ministry of Justice has taken the initiative to meet with civil society, and there are several hearings around the country to discuss it. And I think that is what is needed, to hear what civil society has to say and to understand where they are coming from. And then I think it's too early to judge now. We have to look at the final result then of this bill.
In these hearings that you talk about, there have been cases of disruptions and violence. I mean, does this worry you?
I obviously wish always that the government and civil society can do the dialogues in the most effective form. So when I hear, it makes me sad that that happens. But then I think, as I say, at the end, it's the result which counts. What at the end is in this bill, and in how far could civil society voice their concerns, and in how far this bill will then correspond to what the government wanted to do itself, meaning regulating civil society, but also increasing civic space and not decrease it.
I mean, but there are young people in Zimbabwe, Ambassador, and they would want to know, I mean, if you may share, if there are any opportunities for them in the EU. You know, we have had serious migration in this country, and people are looking for opportunities. What are they that are offered, if any, for Zimbabweans?
I think we believe, first of all, very much into highly educated people in Zimbabwe. Ideally, they find a job in their own country. And I think if you look at the initiatives we are taking, in particular under the initiative Gender Equality and Women Empowerment, but also Green and Climate Smart Agriculture, it's also about job creation. Even under biodiversity, it's about livelihoods. So I think when people look somewhere else, it's because maybe they cannot find the job they want in the country. And I think it is important that we as a partner are also there to help the creation of jobs locally. So what we offer, on the other hand, is we offer people to get adequate and very good high-level training in Europe. We have the Erasmus Plus program, where students or even already graduated people can go to the EU, can get an extra degree, a high level of education, which they can bring back to Zimbabwe. Because, again, I think we as a partner want Zimbabwe to succeed. We want not to deplete Zimbabwe. So therefore, we are a partner rather helping to have even more qualified and higher level qualified people in Zimbabwe than taking them away.
Amazing. I want to thank you very much, His Excellency,
Thank you
for having this conversation with me. But I would be amiss if you do have a message on Africa Day, because we are about to celebrate Africa Day, and maybe if you have any thoughts that you want to share around that.
I think on Africa Day, I just want, as an EU, to pass the message that in Zimbabwe, but also in other African countries, we are a partner who want the countries to succeed. We want that for Zimbabwe. And we want to be there, and we want to be seen as the one who support the vision a country has. And we obviously hope that Zimbabwe will be a highly prosperous upper middle income country by 2030 or even before, and we stand ready to support that.
Amazing. I was in conversation with His Excellency Ambassador, the head of the EU delegation, Jobst van Kirchmann, and we were talking about Zimbabwean relations with the EU and where we're going, where we're coming from. But Ambassador, maybe before I let you go, if there's anything that sits on your heart that you'd want to talk to the people of Zimbabwe, I ask you to look at them and have a conversation with them for a minute or so. If there's anything that I might not have asked, but you'd want to talk to them on.
No, I think we covered it all. And but as I said earlier, I think I would just make an appeal today for companies to take the opportunities the EU offers, and maybe look for this information that they can export to the EU, because it's something we would really like to increase, and we very much believe in it.
Amazing. Now, this is the Free Talk. This will always be the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. Here we believe in ideas, we believe in people, and we talk to each other and never through each other. I'm your host as usual, Dhara B. I was talking to the EU head of delegation. You have had it. Take opportunities, ensure that Zimbabwe sits on the family of nations and becomes a force to reckon. EU with us, EU with me, Dhara B, and let us take our space and be able to work out as a nation. Everyone around us wants us to succeed. As Zimbabweans, we must succeed. So this is the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. I was in conversation with the EU Ambassador, Jobst van Kirchmann, and we're talking about Zimbabwe-EU relations. All right. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.